the idea of Zionism, it is so much under dispute that I think we all have to understand what this idea means and why it is such a central part of Jewish religion and Jewish identity. And therefore, by the way, to teach against Zionism is to teach against a core element of Judaism. And this is a claim that has been made, that people try to separate Zionism from Judaism, but as we see from the Hebrew Bible, as what we call now Zionism, I'll define that in a moment, is actually an integral part. So what does it mean? As you know, now remember, I'll share with things that are from the Bible, and then people make fun of it, that the Israelis are fighting for a mythical idea just written on a few pieces of paper, as I've read recently. But any idea, right, is not an empirically shaped idea. I mean, ideas are matters of the intellect, of the mind, and of the spirit. So is there any empirical way to test to whom the land under dispute belongs? You can no more produce empirical evidence that it belongs to one group or another. So I'm not making a claim in a non-empirical sense which people belongs to what land and what land belongs to certain people. That's something that, of course, needs discussion. But what is Zionism? So as we know, according to the book of Genesis, the divine brought Abraham's father Terach, out of what we'll call today Babylonia, all the way to the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates in Syria, stayed there, and then when Abraham was born, and we might still call that Mesopotamia, it's just a very northern Mesopotamia, Syria today, to continue the journey down into the land of Canaan. The Hebrew word Canaan apparently is from the Hebrew root, if it is indeed a Hebrew word, kana, kaf nun ayin, which in Hebrew means to surrender or to be subjugated to. An analogy might be the Slavs. Why are the Slavs called the Slavs? Because they were a place where slaves were captured, especially from, let's say, from the Germanic tribes in Western Europe. It seems, now again, there's very meager evidence for this, that from an Egyptian perspective and a Mesopotamian perspective, Canaan was a poor, impoverished region where the empires could get slaves. Now, what's some very, very indirect evidence of this? The experience of a certain tribe of Canaanites called the Hebrews, who found themselves slaves in Egypt and yearned to go back to their homeland. Now, the biblical story, of course, is much different. Here we have people going down to Egypt to avoid the famine, but just if you think of it from a big picture perspective, it's a Canaanite tribe of Hebrews in slavery wanting to go back to their land. Now, in the wanting to go back to their land, there was the image now we'll call them the Hebrews, would create in Canaan, would be in some ways opposite of what they had experienced in Egypt. Now, again, we weren't there. We don't know what anybody was thinking, but so all we can do is try to provide a kind of a large picture impression from the text. What we can derive from the text is the escaped slaves from Egypt who yearned to go back to their homeland in Canaan had a very deeply developed idea of justice, perhaps developed from Hammurabi's Code. There are many attempts in the ancient, we'll call it the ancient Middle East, to create a just society with a just legal system. By the way, if you study the history of Greek legal city-states, that really began in Greece in the 500s. So it's really interesting to watch a society try to create the rule of law and a fair legal system. That apparently was deeply on the mind of the escaped slaves from Egypt going back to Canaan. So what we see when the escaped slaves arrive back in Canaan, we look at the book of Judges into the book of Samuel. They're fascinating books to read, by the way. I just have to warn you, the book of Joshua is written much, much later and not useful in understanding the early history of the people of Israel in the land of Canaan. So eventually, as you know, we have the development of King Saul, King David, and so forth. And then when you read other parts of the Torah, for example, Torah portion Mishpatim and other places, you'll see that there was a strong evolving sense of justice, and that Zion would be a place where justice would be established, to proclaim liberty throughout the land, to proclaim justice throughout the land. I want to just give you one little example of how we understand this. You may know from the story of King David that King David he went through a moral decline. He sees his neighbor across the street, Bathsheba. Her husband is an officer in the army of the kingdom of Israel. He takes her to his home. He has sex with her. She becomes pregnant. He contrives that her husband, Uriah, on the front lines will be killed in battle. He takes her as a wife, and she has a child that meets a very, very tragic end. And anyway, in part of the story, the prophet Nathan comes to David and rebukes him, and David repents. And you'll see David's repentance in Psalms 51. It's an extraordinary story. The most extraordinary thing is a civilian, a self-appointed prophet. They're not part of the royal court as far as we know, finds entrance to the king, rebukes the king according to some moral law that says it doesn't matter if you're the king, you can't take any woman that you want, and even though you're the king of the army, you can't contrive to have your soldiers killed. In fact, you are a great sinner. Now, I just want you to think of the background in which that story must exist, which is an extraordinary story if we're going to think about the year 1000 BCE. Try to imagine that happening in the Roman Empire or any other empire, that a commoner, self-appointed prophet rebukes the king and the king repents. You can see this in Psalm 51. All right, so that's just a little bit of what Zion meant, the place where the escaped slaves would go to create a sovereign state rooted in justice and worshiping the one God. Now, what does Zion mean? It seems to be from the Hebrew word in modern Hebrew, litzayen, which means to indicate, to point something out. The Hebrew word mitsuyan means indicated for excellence. So mitsuyan means excellent as an adjective. So Zion, in a sense, is the indicated excellent place. So as you'll see in our Haftorah blessing, let me just read this here. It says, Rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu. God, have compassion to Zion because it is the house of our lives, is the abode of our lives. What does that mean? It's the place where we will build a sovereign state devoted to justice and the worship of God. So then it goes on and says, may the city, now Zion is not only the land of Israel, but the city of Jerusalem. May the city which so long was humbled in spirit know complete deliverance in our day. You are the source of blessing, Adonai, who brings joy to Zion through her returning children. So if you look up the idea of Zionism and see how it operates in the Hebrew Bible, it's deeply connected to the Jewish self-understanding that we are to have a land and create a just society upon that land. Now, it's a very complex history, but I'll just add to this one last thing before I go onto the topic for today. I read recently that Jews are those who practice Judaism. Okay, I want you to realize how backwards that is. Judaism is the ism of the Jews. The word Jew comes first. Jew is a short for Judean. I wish we had never dropped the title Judean because Jew means Judean. What we call Judaism is the ism, the system of thought that the Jewish people created. It is the spiritual religious creation of Judeans. So Jews are not those who follow Judaism. Judeans are those who created a system called Judaism. Now, why is it so important? Because before the Romans changed the name of the land to Palestina, it was called Judea. As far back as we can go, it was Canaan, and then Israel, then Judea, and then the Romans changed the name from Judea to, as far as I know, Palestina. So the term Palestine doesn't recognize anything but a territory that after the exile of the Judeans, it was part of Byzantium, and Byzantium was the Eastern Roman Empire where they spoke, it was a Christian empire where they spoke Greek, Latin, mostly Greek, Latin, and Aramaic. So study this history, study this land, because if you get in a conversation with somebody, it's well for you to know the history of the land, the deeply rooted, we're going to say, Israelite identity with the land. It was known as Judea from the 6th century BCE until the Romans changed it in the 2nd century CE.